Here are 2 bags of salt water. These life-saving bags have been infused into patients in almost every imaginable hospital situation. But one of these bags might have a higher chance of killing you. And scientists and physicians may not be able to tell you which one. Tonight, I want to share with you the incredible story about the development of these IV bags, why salt water is so important for the normal functioning of your heart, and why my research team thinks that salt water may be an extremely effective and cheap way for preventing sudden cardiac death. The history of intravenously injecting salt water into patients can be traced to the 1830s. At that time, Indian blue cholera was raging around the world. A Russian chemist by the name of Herman noted that cholera patients lost almost a quarter of their blood fluidity. And so one of Herman's colleagues had the very bright idea of directly injecting water into the veins of a cholera patient. For 15 minutes, the patient's pulse picked up and his symptoms improved. But what we now know as water poisoning began setting in, and the patient died a few hours later. But this was an important first step. From there, scientists and clinicians went on to develop many different kinds of saltwater bags. And this one, called normal saline, is nothing more than water and table salt. For nearly 2 centuries now, this simple formula has saved billions of lives. The contents of this other bag are named after Dr. Sidney Ringer. In the 1880s, Dr. Ringer published a paper stating that a certain combination of sodium and potassium salts could keep a frog's heart beating for longer than you would expect an exposed heart to beat. Now, precise details are lost to history, but we can gather at some point Dr. Ringer attempted to repeat the experiments that were originally performed by a research assistant. So, imagine Dr. Ringer's horror when he tries to repeat the experiment and now the frog hearts die immediately. After calling in his research assistant to explain the results, this is when Dr. Ringer learned the research assistant had been using tap water, not distilled water. I want to remind you, this is the 1880s in London during the Industrial Revolution, when drinking water was only minimally treated. What Dr. Ringer actually discovered was that sodium and potassium weren't enough. His solutions also needed calcium, a mineral abundant in just the right amounts in the drinking water from the Thames River. So, this is called Ringer's solution, and remarkably, Ringer's solution hasn't substantially changed in the 135 years since the good doctor developed it. Though the precise contents of these bags differ, they do contain the same idea, and that is salt water is a requirement for life, and the heart is an excellent organ to illustrate this point. For you see, in addition to the common elements of life such as hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, sodium, potassium, and calcium are also essential. Reason being that sodium, potassium, and calcium salts dissolve in water to become tiny little electrically charged particles called ions. It's the movement of these electrical charges in and out of cells that causes electrical contraction in your heart beats. But when your heart stops beating suddenly, it's called sudden cardiac death. Sudden death kills children in their cribs and on the sports field. It can kill otherwise healthy adults while they're out walking the dog. It is so important that we have automated external defibrillators on the sidelines of our children's games, in banks, airports, and even in this theater. But these devices can only stop sudden death. They cannot prevent it. To understand why, we need to know how the heart works. Normally, a wave of electricity passes through the heart, organizing contraction. Imagine it like a river current that flows through the heart, pushing out blood on each beat. So, an event like a heart attack is the boulder in a river that can cause eddy currents. These electrical eddy currents can spiral off, leading to chaotic and disorganized contraction. So the heart quivers rather than beats. But disorganized contraction leading to sudden death is rare because heart cells communicate with each other through tiny little protein tubes called gap junctions. Nearly a century of research has led to the conclusion that reducing the number of these gap junctions should slow electrical contraction. But just as Dr. Ringer learned, a relatively small change in the saltwater recipe of his solutions could mean the difference between life and death in a frog heart, we found a similar mystery relating electrical contractions to gap junctions. You see, approximately 20 years ago, scientists engineered a mouse missing half of its gap junctions. Some researchers reported that electrical contractions slowed as expected, while others found the mutant hearts behaved normally. Why the discrepancy? Our research team literally found the answer in the solution. For you see, these experiments had a hidden variable. Scientists, like clinicians, use saltwater recipes that are handed down from previous generations. So we tested the hypothesis that saltwater solutions can modify the electrical response to loss of gap junctions. Behind me, you will see electrical contraction in a normal heart with two different saltwater solutions passing through it. Next, you will see electrical contraction in a heart missing half of its gap junctions with these same two solutions. Now, these movies are pretty quick, so we're going to slow them down to take a closer look. In the normal heart, electrical contraction doesn't really change much, even if you use one of these two solutions. But in the heart missing half of its gap junctions, things are very different. As this movie pauses, you can see that in only one movie, electrical contraction is incomplete. This means that one of these saltwater solutions slows electrical contraction more in a heart missing half its gap junctions. Or in simple language, salt water can unmask a cardiac disease. But these movies tell you something equally incredible, and that is, with just the right saltwater recipe, you can keep a genetic disease in a non-lethal state. Think about it. A genetic mutation in an organ as important as your heart should function abnormally all the time. Is it possible then, one reason why it's so difficult to diagnose certain cardiac diseases in young people may be due to some other salt-dependent mechanism, a sort of backup mechanism for cell-to-cell communication? If true, we'd want to know what that mechanism is. Let me remind you that electrical contraction can pass from cell to cell through gap junctions, but if cells are close enough together, the electrical activity can also pass on the outside of the cell. And this process is called Eaptic coupling. Our research demonstrates that the right kinds of different salts on the outsides of cells are enormously important to supporting this alternate form of cellular communication for continuing electrical contraction even when gap junctions are lost. What does this mean for you and me? Well, in a relatively healthy patient, either of these saltwater bags can effectively keep you alive in the hospital. But if you have a genetic cardiac disease, the wrong saltwater recipe or the wrong bag may mean the difference between life and death. Why don't we know which bag to use for which disease? Well, let's consider a statement that appeared in a recent article in the journal Nature, that science advances faster when people waste less time pursuing false leads. Or a following statement, that there is a growing alarm about results that cannot be reproduced. I want to remind you that Ringer's solution is a direct result of his inability to repeat his own experiments. And the data I just shared with you is likewise a result of investigating accurate but inconsistent findings in the literature. Therefore, what works in one laboratory does not necessarily work in another laboratory, because there are often overlooked basic assumptions. I think one of the most important and perhaps currently least considered assumption is the saltwater solution that keeps cells and tissues alive in the laboratory and patients alive in the hospital. Now, this is a really nice hypothesis, and you may be wondering if I have any other evidence that there are certain saltwater solutions for certain cardiac diseases. So tonight, I want to leave you with one final movie of a cardiac disease that many of us in this audience are likely to experience over the course of our lives, independent of your genetic background. Once again, you're looking at electrical contraction in a normal heart. This is what happens during a heart attack when blood flow stops. 8 minutes later, electrical activity is sort of wrapping around one side of the heart, like a river current around the boulder. And in the river, it's normal. In a heart, this will lead to sudden cardiac death. This is what happens if we change the saltwater recipe before we stop blood flow. And this saltwater solution was developed in our laboratory based on our previous findings. 8 minutes later, a heart with no blood flow is contracting like a normal heart. This is real data. And in the last 12 months, we've adjusted the saltwater recipes for 5 very different cardiac diseases. We've turned abnormally functioning hearts into normally functioning hearts. And we did it by adjusting one of the most established techniques in the clinic and laboratory. I hope you're just as excited as I am for all the work that is being done to investigate cardiac disease. I truly think we will be able to treat it. And I hope you're just as excited as I am for the next scientific controversy. Thank you.